Howdy, friends. I'm Joel Empey. Welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. And on today's episode, we're going to look forward to waiver wire ads for Week 8 in fantasy football. We're going to look at the top bets for Week 8 in the regular NFL. We're going to look at the top suicide/survivors/locks of the week for Week 8 in the NFL. But first, I want to talk about one team that I think was the biggest winner in Week 7. So in the AFC right now, it is just like it has been for the last several years. The Patriots are by far the front runners in the entire conference. But who's the second best team in the AFC? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves now. A lot of people, a few weeks ago would have been the Chiefs for sure, right? The Chiefs might have even debatably been better than the Patriots a few weeks ago before they had the losing streak and, lost Mahomes to injury. And then, of course, last week, the Texans beat the Chiefs. And that was, Mahomes was playing that game and the Texans were able to beat the Chiefs. So a lot of people probably would have considered the Texans to be, at that point, maybe the second best team in the AFC after the Patriots. But now let's look at a team that in consecutive games beat the Chiefs, and then they had their bye week, and then they beat the Texans. So in consecutive games, this AFC team beat the Chiefs and the Texans. And in case you haven't figured that out by now, the team I'm talking about is the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are flying under the radar right now. I think people still consider them to be just a mediocre team. They don't consider Jacoby Brissett to be an elite quarterback. They still have the narrative in their minds that, the Colts lost Andrew Luck and they're going to be in serious trouble for this season, and Jacoby Brissett is nothing but a game manager. That's not true. Jacoby Brissett is a lot more than a game manager. Jacoby Brissett is a top 5 candidate for the MVP trophy right now. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the stats of it all. I mean, Jacoby Brissett was only named the starting quarterback of the Colts about 2 weeks before the regular season began. So he gets thrust into this bad situation, and he's 4th in touchdown passes right now in the NFL. He has 14 touchdown passes. There's only 3 guys that are ahead of him: Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes. All 3 of those guys have started 7 games compared to 6 games for Brissett, and they all only have 1 more touchdown at 15 compared to Brissett's 14. And then Brissett also has multiple touchdowns in every single game this year, except for the one against the Chiefs, which was obviously a really run-heavy game plan because they're trying to beat the Chiefs by controlling the time of possession, running the ball, keeping the ball out of Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs' offense's hands. So that was the only situation all year where Brissett hasn't thrown for multiple touchdowns in a single game. Brissett's second in touchdown percentage. He's 9th in quarterback rating. I mean, he's doing extremely well by every metric imaginable. And then the Colts as a team are winning a lot. They're 4-2, and they've had a litany of injuries. Marlon Mack's been banged up a bunch. T.Y. Hilton's been banged up a bunch. Darius Leonard, who is the most important player, most valuable player on their defense, the centerpiece of their defense, playing middle linebacker, missed multiple games with concussion. They've lost Malik Hooker, their safety, who's, backside, one of the most important players on their team. They've lost / have played with diminished versions of so many of their star players, yet they are number 1 in the AFC South. But that AFC South race is still extremely close. So I'm right now claiming I think the Colts are the second best team in the AFC. They have, without a doubt, earned that spot, in my opinion. But just because they have earned that spot doesn't mean that they're a shoo-in to finish in that spot. If you look at the AFC South, the Jaguars and the Titans are only 1 win behind the Colts, 1.5 games back because the Colts have had their bye and those teams haven't. And then, the Titans are really, in particular, the Titans. The Jaguars are a good football team, but the Titans right now, they have a really good team. They could build on their momentum that they just had this past week with Tannehill in at quarterback, who looked a lot more competent than Marcus Mariota. Shout out to Ryan Tannehill. You can see him over my shoulder there. October calendar player of the month for Miami Dolphins official calendar. undefeated on the season. Out of boy Tanny. But where was I going? The Titans are a good football team is what I was driving at. They're a good football team that could finish. They could be a playoff team towards the end of the season. And then the Texans are certainly not out of it just because they lost this past week. They have as many wins as the Colts. They're half a game behind the Colts once again because the Colts have had their bye and the Texans haven't. But, I mean, that division, most competitive division in the AFC, it's still all wide open. I'm not saying that the Colts have run away with it and they've ran away with the second place in the AFC, but we have to respect that right now they are the second best team in the AFC. Jacoby Brissett is playing like an MVP. We have to start watching the Colts with that filter over our eyes as we're judging them. We're not watching a game manager. We're not watching a mediocre team. We're watching a really good team. And we're watching a really good quarterback. So just keep that in mind when you're watching the Colts and how they develop for the rest of the season. I love Jacoby Brissett. I'm a big Colts guy. I don't know why. I've always just, Johnny Unitas way back in the day. And then, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett. I just love the quarterbacks on the Colts. I love the Colts in general. I can't wait to watch how the rest of the season plays out for them. See if they can hold on to that spot, or if Brissett's play starts to diminish over time, maybe as they give him a bigger role, ask him to throw the ball 30, 40 times a game, and expect him to be a lot more than a game manager. Maybe he's not up for the task, but we're at a point now where Jacoby Brissett should be treated like a high caliber quarterback and should be getting that kind of a game script written for him. And let's see how the rest of the season plays out for the Colts. All right, guys, now let's look at the suicide picks of the week, survivor picks of the week, locks of the week, however you want to call it. I hope that you're still alive in your suicide pools. I'm still alive in both of mine, hoping that we can get some big money and win this pool this year. So my number one pick for suicide pools for this week would be the Vikings over the Redskins on Thursday Night Football. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than the Vikings over the Redskins. The Vikings have been playing now tremendous football over the last 3 weeks. Kirk Cousins has been really good over the last 3 weeks offensively. Even if Kirk Cousins was playing the way that he was playing earlier in the year when everybody was super low on him, the Vikings would still be a guaranteed victory for this week. They're the highest spread differential at they're 16-point favorites over the Redskins. I mean, it's just an obvious matchup to attack. Now my second pick, this is based off of if Matt Ryan doesn't play, but the Seahawks over the Falcons. To be honest, I would favor the Seahawks over the Falcons enough to have them as one of my suicide picks of the week, even if Matt Ryan does play. But if Matt Ryan doesn't play, the Seahawks are just a shoo-in. And the Seahawks, while they have obviously won a lot this year, they've only lost 2 games. They've been more volatile in their performances than you would hope. Russell Wilson has to make these heroic comebacks for them to win. They barely beat the Bengals in week 1. Russell Wilson had to make a heroic comeback. Russell Wilson is, leading the NFL in fourth quarter comebacks and stuff like that. So I just, in general, don't super have a ton of trust in the Seahawks this season, just because they have to have these comebacks to get the victories. And even this past week, they should have beaten the Ravens, I think, in a lot of people's eyes, and they got dominated in that game, really. So Seahawks are a team that I'm apprehensive to use. So if you can get them against the Falcons with no Matt Ryan, this is a great time to use the Seahawks. It's a good opportunity to use a good team against a bad team, and that good team is a team that you can't necessarily trust all the time. So this would be a good week to use the Seahawks if Matt Ryan doesn't play. Now my next pick is going to be the Rams over the Bengals. The Rams obviously had a bit of a bounce back week this past week against the Falcons, which anybody can get right against the Falcons, and Goff proved that. The Bengals are another super favorable matchup. The Rams are a better team in the NFL. Bengals are one of the worst teams in the NFL. Rams aren't phenomenal or anything, but they're a much, much better team than the Bengals. That's a easy W. And once again, the Rams are a team that this year, they're not as easy to trust as you would like. So if you have, this opportunity to use them in such a favorable matchup, this is the time to use them. Now, the last one is the most obvious one. Pick the Steelers against the Dolphins. Pick against the Dolphins every week in the suicide pool. I mean, damn, man. Fitzpatrick almost won us the game against the Bills. I was nervous. That Fitzpatrick was going to win that one. And that does make me a little bit nervous going forward. Fitzpatrick gives us a chance to win, which is why I don't know why we're putting him out there. Put Josh Rosen out there. He gives us no chance to win. For some reason, the Dolphins, even though we're clearly tanking, are also putting out our best quarterback, which gives us the best chance to win. When we're trying to tank, it doesn't really make sense. But the Steelers, they have 2 weeks to prepare for this. Their defense is really good. Really good defense, especially, ever since we traded the Steelers, Minkah Fitzpatrick. They've been phenomenal defensively. Miami's just not going to be able to score more points than the Steelers this week. Even with Fitzpatrick playing, Fitzpatrick level football, I really have almost zero faith in the Dolphins to win this game. So, and the Steelers are a team, again, you're going to have a hard time finding an opportunity to play the Steelers. If you can, in the middle of the season here, start pegging off some of these teams that you're going to have a hard time finding spots to play them, then it'll save, some of your better teams for the end of the season in the suicide pool. And man, if you have some good teams, like if you have the Niners, the Patriots, or some good teams towards the end of the season, that's going to ease your stress levels a lot and really help you to win the big prize. All right, guys, now let's look into the best bets for the NFL in Week 8. I've only got 2 picks for this. The first one is Thursday Night Football. We got the Redskins taking on the Vikings, and this is a bet that I always love. It's an under bet. Unders on Thursday Night Football just feels always like a great bet to me because Thursday Night Football it's always a notoriously low-scoring game with inept offenses who are coming off of short weeks and didn't have the proper time to game plan or heal their players up to be able to put forth a really valiant offensive effort. Now, of course, bookies take that into account when making the lines. So you need to, pick your spots for when you want to take the under. But in this game, I just love the under on 42 points. The reasons why I love that is if you look at the Vikings have held better offenses, much better offenses in the Falcons and the Giants to fewer than 13 points. Now, why is 13 points an important metric? The implied point total to this game, if it's a 42-point over-under, and the Vikings are 16-point favorites, the implied point outcome is Vikings 29 to Redskins 13. So they've held better offenses in the Falcons and the Giants to fewer than 13 points, which is what the Redskins are projected to score. So I think it's safe to assume that the Vikings should be able to hold the Redskins to fewer than that 13 points, considering that it's a short week, considering that they've done it to better offenses. And then against the Falcons and the Giants, once again, we'll use those as the examples. The Vikings were only able to put up 28 points against both of those teams, and those defenses are both worse scoring defenses than the Redskins. So it's not safe to assume, but it's very reasonable to assume that the Vikings, if they're able to put up 28 on these lesser defenses in the Giants and the Falcons, I'm not saying that the Redskins have a much better scoring defense, but they do have a better scoring defense than the Giants and the Falcons. So if the Vikings were able to put up 28 points on the Giants and the Falcons and they have worse scoring defenses, it's reasonable to assume that they'll put up less than 28 points against the Redskins. So if the Redskins are going to put up less than 13 and the Vikings are going to put up less than 28, then there's no way that they're going to meet the implied point total of 42. I think this game is going to be something like 24-10, so 34-point total on the game. It's just this is a bet that I really like this week. There's not many bets that I like this week, but this one really jumps out at me. So the first bet, under 42 points in the Vikings-Redskins game. My second bet of the week is Carolina plus 5.5 versus San Francisco. Now, You might look at this game and think, hey, San Francisco's only not covered 5.5 points once all season. Only once all season have they not won by, at least 5.5 points. So what are the odds that Carolina is going to be able to do something that only one team all season has been able to do against the Niners? Well, here's an interesting thing to consider. Kyle Allen, I should say it like this. 3 quarterbacks this season have multiple wins under their belt and are undefeated. Tom Brady, obviously. Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously. And then Kyle Allen is the third guy. Kyle Allen, 4-0 on the season, hasn't lost a game yet. The Panthers have 2 weeks to prepare for this game because they were on bye last week. You have to think that this is going to be a close, low-scoring game. I think this is going to be a guaranteed low-scoring game, and I think it's going to be a really close one. Panthers have, like I said, 2 weeks to prepare for this one. They haven't lost yet with Kyle Allen under center. So why are they 5.5 points, almost touchdown underdogs in this game? I understand they're on the road, but they have 2 weeks to prepare. It's West Coast, it's not East Coast. Going from West to East is a lot harder than going from East to West. So I think the Panthers, I think it's going to be a 3 or 4 point game. I think it's going to be, a field goal or a 4-point game in this one. And I think that if you are feeling frisky, you could even do the Panthers straight up money line. I actually think the Panthers have a decent chance of getting the upset this week. The Niners aren't going to go undefeated this season. They're going to lose at some point. And this to me seems like a losable game. A game that they could lose. At this point of the season, we're not at the midway point yet, and it could really benefit the team because they'll realize, that they aren't invincible and that they really need to work hard every week in order to prepare to win. So yeah, I think that if you're feeling frisky, you could go Panthers straight up money line in this one and make a pretty penny on them. But even if you're not feeling quite that frisky, which I'm not sure if I am, I love the Panthers plus 5.5. I think it's going to be a really close, low-scoring game that could teeter either way. And I think these are both NFC playoff teams, and this is going to be a good battle. That's going to be a close game. 5.5 points, a bit too rich in my opinion. So I love the Panthers plus 5.5, and my other bet once again is under 42 points for Minnesota versus the Redskins on Thursday Night Football. Those are my 2 bets of the week. Lock them up, baby. All right, guys, now let's look at fantasy football waiver wire ads for week 8. And we're going to start at the running back position where I've got just one guy to talk about, and that's Ty Johnson. Now, Ty Johnson, backup running back for the Lions. He is a must-add if you are a Kerryon Johnson owner or have bad bye weeks at the running back position this week. And Ty Johnson, not the sexiest player, but if Kerryon can't play this weekend, which it's up in the air at this point, the reports are a little bit conflicting coming out of Detroit. But right now, I think we're assuming that Kerryon's not going to play at least this 1 week up and coming. And the Lions get to take on the Giants, who were just destroyed by Chase Edmonds. This is, an extremely easily winnable game for the Lions. So that makes for a really, really good, favorable game plan for whoever is the starting running back for the Lions. If Kerryon Johnson isn't good to go, Ty Johnson is going to be that guy. He's going to be in line for a lot of work, making him a really safe floor play. But also, if you look at just what Chase Edmonds did to the Giants last week, 3 touchdowns, over 100 yards. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but he had an enormous day against the Giants last week. So considering that, Ty Johnson's ceiling is also very high. So his floor is very high and his ceiling is pretty high. He's a quality play this week. If you're, like I said, if you're a Kerryon owner or you just have running backs that are stuck on buys this week, Ty Johnson should be your number 1 ad. Now looking at wide receiver, the first guy I'm just going to talk about briefly because he should already be owned in your league, and that's Kenny Stills. If Kenny Stills isn't owned in your league, just go check right now. If he's not owned, pick him up right away. He's a guy who should be owned. He's a must own in every league. So he shouldn't be out on the waiver wire. But if he is, go out and get him. He's like a guaranteed flex play every week. He's the I mean, as long as he stays healthy. That's been the problem with Kenny, which is the reason why he might be on your waiver wire, because he did get injured and only just came back this past week. But Kenny Stills is the wide receiver 2 for the Texans that we've all been waiting for, that we've all hoped for. DeAndre Hopkins is such an overwhelming number 1 target on that team that's going to always draw the most interest from opposition, the best corner, the most double teams. So whoever's that number 2 wide receiver in Houston is going to see tremendously favorable coverages all the time, right? So we were hoping that, it would be Will Fuller, but we all knew Will Fuller's more of a deep threat guy, so we weren't exactly sure of that. He's more a boom or bust type of play. So then we were all hoping Kiki QT, would be that good, reliable wide receiver too to Hopkins, while Fuller is, the deep threat guy. But Kenny Stills, since getting traded from the Dolphins to the Texans, has proven that he's by far the number 2 guy. He can be a deep threat like Fuller, maybe not to quite the same degree, but he can also be a reliable receiver underneath. Kenny Stills is one of the most underrated wide receivers in the league. Like I said, you just need to check your waiver wire to see if he's available. If he is, he's a guy you can play at the flex all the time. You can probably play him as your wide receiver 2 during bye weeks and stuff like that. He's just a guy that needs to be owned in every league, so just go check to see if he's available. Now, the next wide receiver I'm going to talk about, in some ways, has some parallels to what I was just talking about with Kenny Still. And this guy I'm going to talk about now is Zach Pascal. Now, the similarities between him and Kenny Stills are just that, on both these teams, the Colts and the Texans, they have number 1 wide receivers that are overwhelmingly obvious. Like T.Y. Hilton is overwhelmingly, obviously, the number 1 wide receiver on the Colts. Just like DeAndre Hopkins is overwhelmingly, obviously, the number 1 wide receiver on the Texans. So when you've got that kind of an obvious number 1 guy, then if you can find somebody to be a suitable second option, that player is going to thrive, just eat in that type of a system. So we've all been waiting, once again, just like with the Texans, we've all been waiting, is it Chester Rogers? Is it Paris Campbell? Like, you're trying to figure out who this second wide receiver on Indy could be. We've all been trying to predict it, hoping that we're getting it right, picking up guys off the waiver wire. I think after this past week that it seems to me that Zach Pascal is clearly the guy that got the best opportunity at taking that number 2 wide receiver position on the team. Now, a lot of people are going to look at Zach Pascal's stat line and maybe agree with me, or, look at his stat line and think, maybe that's just an anomaly of a game, or look at his stat line and agree with me because it's like, oh, wow, look at, he had, 6 catches, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Yeah, that seems like a great player. But more so than just like the 6 catches, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, like the obviousness of that being a great stat line, I think if you actually watched that game, it was really, really encouraging to see the way that the Colts tried to use Pascal. They clearly like this guy. They come up with all kinds of dynamic ways to get the ball in his hands, whether it be he returns kicks for the team. They gave him that nice shovel pass, which is in the red zone, which is a total misdirection. Like, you're trying to get the ball into an athlete's hands type of a play. Which, shows that they're game planning different unique ways to just get this guy the ball. They even had him throw a pass in this game, the Colts did. So they're trying to figure out unique ways to get this guy the ball. They obviously like him, and they draw up game plans and plays to get this guy involved in the game. And that was the really, really encouraging part of the game to me, watching Pascal play. I mean, the stat line is almost unfortunate. You almost hope he didn't have as good of a stat line because everybody's going to target him because of that stat line. But I think he is worth the hype. A lot of people are maybe thinking that it was an anomaly and he's not worth the hype that he's going to garner right now after that huge stat line this past week. I think he is, because of the opportunity that Indy gave him and the faith and trust that they put into him and the unique ways that they deliberately tried to get him the football. Those are all super encouraging things to see that should make for sustainable growth and sustainable production for Pascal going in the future. I think he's the number one must-add player this week. Now, I'm going to talk about two guys here, and neither of these guys are sexy pickups, but they're quality wide receivers that are almost guaranteed available on your waiver wire that can provide good, safe floors with decent ceilings for your fantasy teams if you're stuck with wide receivers on bye weeks or injuries or whatever. And that's Miami Dolphins wide receivers, Devontae Parker and Preston Williams. Now, these guys are only valuable, in my opinion, really as long as Fitzpatrick is the starting quarterback for the Dolphins, which we've announced going into next week that that Fitzpatrick is going to be the starter for the Dolphins. And as long as he is the starter, Fitzpatrick is a competent quarterback who is pretty accurate and is not afraid of putting the ball into tight windows. And both these guys, Williams and Parker, are athletic guys that have the ability to make contested catches. Plus, the Dolphins are always going to be playing from behind. We're always going to have a positive game script in terms of passing the ball. In terms of throwing the football, we're always going to have a game script that's going to favor that. So we're going to have to throw the ball a ton to keep up. Fitzpatrick doesn't mind trying to fit it into tight windows. These guys can win contested catches. So both these guys are going to see targets. They're going to have receptions. They have safe floors. And then with the touchdown upsides, they have decent ceilings as well. Devontae Parker has touchdowns in 3 straight games. Preston Williams has 44 targets on the year. That ties him with guys like Calvin Ridley, Jarvis Landry, Brandon Cooks, Mike Williams. These guys have opportunities and have produced somewhat in those opportunities. So while you're stuck in bye week hell, these guys can be good fill-ins for the interim. They're not sexy, but they can give you that base level of production that can get you a win and can keep you afloat during bye week hell. Now, looking at tight end, I've got one good streaming option for this week, and that's Kyle Rudolph. This is also provided that Adam Thielen doesn't play this week, which it's a short week with the Vikings playing on Thursday night. So I think it's likely that Thielen is going to be out, considering that, he couldn't return to the game on Sunday, just yesterday. So I assume that Thielen's going to be out, and if Thielen is out, Kyle Rudolph is a solid streaming option at tight end for the week. Kirk Cousins prefers to throw shorter, prefers to throw more inside or slot type of routes rather than outside routes, to his perimeter wide receivers and, deeper running routes. He prefers the shorter routes, the intermediate routes, and, the safer throws, if you will. So with Thielen out, Rudolph is going to have an increased target share. We just saw this past week, after Thielen went out, Rudolph finally had his first good game of the season, his first touchdown of the year, so on. So I just think that if Thielen is going to be out this week, which it really seems like he will be, that Rudolph is a good, safe tight end play. There's not very many good tight end plays out there on the waiver wire. Not very many good tight ends that are going to provide you a safe floor. I think Rudolph provides a safe floor of probably 50 yards, and he's got touchdown upside with Thielen out of the game. So make sure Thielen's out. And if Thielen is out and you need a tight end to stream this week, Rudolph's your guy. All right, guys, now into streaming quarterbacks for the week. My number one quarterback streaming option is Minshew versus the Jets. The Jets give up the 9th most passing yards per game to quarterbacks, while they give up less than 100 rushing yards per game. So they're a team that gives up a lot more in the passing than they do in the rushing. And then you have to think the Jags are generally a team whose identity is a lot more running the football than passing the football. So by virtue of that, I believe the Jets are going to lean heavily on their run defense, try mightily to stop Leonard Fournette, and force Gardner Minshew to beat him with his arm, which I think Minshew can do. Minshew is in the top 16, so upper half of quarterbacks in yards per game and in touchdowns, and he only has 2 interceptions this year. So Minshew's ability to have a low turnover rate, and then he's got some rushing upside. He can take off for a good 30, 40 yards per game. Has touchdown upside rushing potentially as well. And then he's got such a great matchup. I think he's a QB1 this week. I think he's a low-end QB1, probably going to finish around the 10 to 12 spot. But, I mean, that's a great, great streaming option for the week. Now, my number 2 streaming option for quarterback this week is Ryan Tannehill. Believe it or not, I think Tannehill's going to have a great week. It's a similar thing to what I just described with Minshew and the Jets, but even more extreme, where the Bucs give up the most passing yards per game to quarterbacks and the least rushing yards per game to running backs. So the way to beat the Bucs is obviously and clearly by throwing the football. You're going to have a hard time trying to run the ball against the Bucs. They only give up 68 yards per game to rushers, right? And then the wide receiver core on the Titans, you kind of forgot because Mariota has been just mediocre at best mediocre, right? So you forget that the talent on the wide receiver core for the Titans is very real. Corey Davis is a legit freak athlete. That's why he was drafted so high. People think that he's a bust, but if he was playing on like the Seahawks, let's say, with Russell Wilson as a quarterback, do you think Corey Davis would be a bust? Or has it been Marcus Mariota, just inept quarterback play, that has made him a bust? What about A.J. Brown, who is a tremendous athlete in his own right and has had some boom weeks this year with Mariota? Adam Humphries, phenomenal slot guy underneath. Tannehill loves to use the slot guys. I think that there's just wide receivers available for Tannehill. The Bucs give up the most passing yards per game and the least rushing yards per game. This is just spelling a great day for a quarterback who just happens to be Ryan Tannehill, who just happened to have his first start of the season last week and looked phenomenal, put up a great stat line against a tougher defense. Not a lot tougher. I mean, the Chargers are kind of trash, but against a tougher matchup, he had a phenomenal week last week. So why couldn't he have a phenomenal week this week? I think that he could be a top 12 play, and Ryan Tannehill, 100% guaranteed, is available in your fantasy league on waivers. So if you have bad bye week or quarterback woes of some kind, Ryan Tannehill, guaranteed option out there. And I would guarantee he's a top 15 quarterback this week, and I would not be surprised if he's top 12, top 10 maybe. Now, my number 1 streaming defense for the week is Pittsburgh versus Miami. This is an obvious trend. You attack the Miami Dolphins in suicide pools. You attack the Miami Dolphins with your defense, special teams, and fantasy leagues. You attack the Miami Dolphins as much as you physically can, because that's the easiest way to get guaranteed wins or points or whatever in whatever iteration of football that you're gambling on, right? Because Pittsburgh was on bye last week, they're only 34% owned, at least on ESPN.com, which is where I check that. They're 34% owned, so there's a high likelihood that you have them available on your waiver wire. They're going to be everybody's top choice for this week, so if you don't have a high waiver priority, you might not have the best chance at getting them, which is why I'm going to state now, you should be almost attacking Miami like a week in advance if you can. So right now, this week, the Jets tonight are playing the Patriots, so nobody owns the Jets. And then next week, Jets are on bye, I believe, or they're playing the Jaguars, actually. Never mind. They play the Jaguars next week. Yeah, that's right. So anyways, the Patriots, they play the Patriots tonight, the Jets do. And then next week, the Miami's playing Pittsburgh. And then the week after that, Miami plays the Jets. So, because the Jets are playing the Patriots, nobody owns the Jets. The Jets are 100% available, right? If you can go out and get the Jets now, like if you have an extra roster spot that you don't mind, just mind the Jets just sitting there next week while They play the Jaguars. You don't use them next week. You use a different defense. But then the week after, you're already ready for when the Jets play Miami. So just something to think about. You might want to start attacking Miami like 2 weeks in advance just to make sure you can get the defense. Because if you wait till next week to try to get the Jets, after they played the Jaguars, everybody's going to be trying to get the Jets, just like everybody's going to be trying to get the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. So you might want to consider attacking Miami's defenses a week in advance if you could spare the roster spot, which I would understand if you can't. It's bye weeks and all that. But if you can, that might be a way for you to steal some defensive points, like guaranteed good defensive points every single week. So now my second and final DST to attack this week. It's a defense that's even less owned than the Steelers. You're going to have a much higher probability of being able to get them because everybody's going to want to get the Steelers. So you could prioritize this defense as your number one waiver priority, and you have a high probability of getting them. And that's the Colts defense taking on the Broncos this week. The Broncos have the 8th worst offense in the NFL, scoring-wise. And Indy, in their last 2 games, has put up 9 points against Kansas City, and then 8 points. This is fantasy football points I'm talking about. 9 points against Kansas City, and then 8 points against Houston. Both those teams are top 4 offenses in the NFL. They're both top 4 offenses. Denver is a bottom 8 offense. So Indy just put up great fantasy production against tremendous offenses. This week they have a very shitty offense. Let's just call a spade, a shit offense to go up against. And they're only 16% owned. So you have an extremely high probability of being able to get them, especially if you prioritize them as your top waiver priority. You're guaranteed going to be able to get the Colts. And right now, I mean, you look at that recent track record, and, Darius Leonard's back on the Colts. You look at that recent track record of their 2 most recent games against much more difficult offenses to play against, and they have really, really promising score lines. I mean, you have to assume that they're going to be able to do well against the Broncos. I think they are going to be able to do well. Once again, they're only 16% owned. So if you prioritize it, you're going to be able to get the Colts, and they'll definitely be a top 12, probably top 10, they could finish as high as top 5 defense of the week. I wouldn't expect them to be maybe a top 5 defense, but top 12 defense for sure. 16% owned. You have to attack that kind of production at that ownership rate. All right, folks, that does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. I really appreciate your watching of the episode. If you could subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate that. Like the video if you did enjoy it. Comment below. I'm happy to address any comments or have any kind of back and forth about anything that you have question-wise about football, MMA, anything. So comment below. Follow me on Twitter at Empey Talks. And until next time. Cheers, friends.